Welcome back, everybody. This is the 14th episode of Humaning, and not the 13th, as I previously thought. This is Intellect's YouTube series, where I like to bring together hosts, friends, community members from around the world to talk about something that they might not even know about, unites them in their practices as young intellectuals. Today, I am joined by Anwar AlKandari, who comes live from Kuwait City, and Matthew Groh, who is joining us from Boston. Two fantastic young thinkers, deeply devoted to the creative arts, music, visual arts, fiction, and you guys also host intellect salons, combining the power of, philosophical investigation or exploration and an artistic practice. So we will talk a little bit about you guys and your lives and careers outside Intellect, Chopin, MIT Media Lab, and wherever your most groundbreaking ideas arise. And also, I thought we could try to encourage and edify people who want to live both as thinkers and artists, how to do it, where are the sweet spots, and how the two areas of human ingenuity can inform and enrich the other. So like no big deal, like just the biggest questions of life, and we will see where we land. Do you guys maybe want to do a little bit of an intro? We could start, Anwar, with you and kind of to deep dive into what you guys are working on. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. So hi, everyone. It's Anwar from Kuwait. And I think you just asked the hardest question is to introduce myself and what do I do in life, because it's hard to find just one thing. But you mentioned the word sweet spots, and I just graduated I just done my bachelor's in industrial engineering, and I'm a pianist. And on the sweet spots, it feels like I'm trying to create unique combinations of stuff. It's a bit, it causes me a bit of sometimes anxiety, because it's like industrial engineering, music, how could I ever combine these two things? But at the same time, just because some combinations did not exist before, that does not mean that we cannot create a new combination of industrial engineering, music, and not necessarily industrial engineering and music, but also I've hosted salons on storytelling, self-narratives, and I feel like these topics welcome everyone from different fields. You see storytelling through arts, visual arts, and through like musicians. And basically, at the end of the day, you just sit and be like, wow, like everyone is really trying to narrate their own story, even though it's not verbally, but everyone is looking for a story, not only to narrate stories, but to also seek stories from music pieces, from art pieces, even from physics books. I would say it's not exclusive, of course, to art. Everything, like I've had brilliant economics, entrepreneurs, and scientists who have attended the storytelling salons, and all we're seeking at the end of the day is stories. And as like there's this quote, I hope I'm saying it correctly, that the human mind is a story processor, not a logic processor. And whenever there's no story, our mind just involuntarily fills it with a story. This is how just our minds work. And yeah, that's what I do in life: seek stories, narrate stories. So yeah.
We are story brains, right? Our brains are we can only, because we are space-time that has experience, right? We can only absorb the world as it unfolds in time. And if there's time, there's causality, and if there's causality, there is a story, right? Then there is a sequence of emotional reactions to the causality and how it works. I love this so much. And I have a friend who he attended the university in Israel where Yuval Noah Harari teaches or taught. I don't know if he still teaches. He was teaching just kind of normal, everyday, history of economics. He wasn't a big deal at the time. I don't know if he's a big deal now, but at the time he was just an academic. And my friend tells me that, he was such an excellent storyteller. Like he could come in and explain to you the history of economics. Like you were at the edge of your seat. I always talk about The Tragedy of the Moon by Isaac Asimov, which is one of my favorite books. It's just this collection of Anwar is already like ordering it on Amazon. It's fantastic. I know you. I know what you do. I know the Amazon ordering faces of everybody in Interact when they do that. And it's like, it's just science essays. But he writes about like carbon. Like you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen to carbon next? What is it going to bind with? And it's like carbon. No, you're just binding with anything, right? It's just super funny. And he's a chemist, right? Like you can imagine his chemistry classes in high school before he started writing books. I'm sure his students were enthralled, right, by just the power of storytelling. So I love this angle. Matt, what is your storytelling take? Tell us the story of your storytelling take.
The meta story. Well, just one reflection on that is this idea of our imagination being made up of stories while the universe is made up of atoms. And so just putting numbers to it, there's 10 to 80th about atoms in the universe. But if you look at how many different permutations there are of books in the Borges library, there's actually much, much more. And so it gets kind of crazy. Now, a lot of that is noise and a lot of that's like kind of nonsense. But if you think about just like how much we can tell, there's just so much there, and it gets really, really fun. So on storytelling, I mean, art and science and engineering, design, and many other aspects are all integrated here. And so one of the things that I like to do is combine those different 4 aspects. And so my research, I'm at the MIT Media Lab. I'm a 4th year PhD student, so I still have probably a year and a half left of grad school. And what I like to do is explore data-driven decision-making, and particularly how we could extend our intelligence, how we could use AI in different ways to better diagnose diseases, help doctors do that, help general practitioners, whatnot, or like to think about how do we discern kind of truth from falsehood. And so looking at specific cases in video and looking at manipulations of faces, what are often called deep fakes today. And so a bunch of different kind of things that actually get into age-old philosophical questions of like, how do you, distinguish justified belief from an opinion kind of thing, which is kind of at the core of epistemology. But now we're actually facing that with misinformation today. And so maybe like the best way to kind of start off one of these thoughts is, I don't think there's so many differences between art and science and thinking. And I like to kind of think about, what does it even mean to be a thinker? Like the first thing I think about is like Rodin's sculpture, which is like, oh, wait, that starts with like thinking, or that starts with art. But because like thinker is like, I hope everyone's a thinker, it's like to be thoughtless is not a good thing in society. And, you don't have to be a scientist or a philosopher to be a thinker, though, of course, like the, kind of iconic thinker is that philosopher. And so I'll stop there. I have lots of other like thoughts, but I'll let you kind of get this started, Anna.
Thank you so much. I love that you brought up medicine. I had a fantastic conversation a couple of years ago with somebody who was researching nonviolent communication. And she told me this story that one of the weird things about conversation is that if you're sitting physically, not on Zoom, but if you're physically sitting face to face with somebody, even if it's like on a date or, a family dinner or anything, the kind of monkey level of your brain sees that as an opposition. So some part of you is geared for conflict, to fly or fight, right? And so they started doing experiments with the doctors, right? So in a doctor's office, especially in the English-speaking countries, you go in and there's a desk, and the doctor is almost like an opponent, kind of on the, again, like a very kind of mammal level of behavior. And this is a particular problem when the news is not good, right? Especially if it requires great investment or great sacrifice or work from the side of the patient. And so they started doing research and just taking patients for a walk. First of all, probably eventually you learn if the doctor says like, let's go for a walk, you're like, oh no. But just from the physical act of walking, you're in time, right? There's progress, you're going somewhere, you're equals, you're facing the same direction. And the patient suddenly understands that this is a story. So this is my diagnosis, or this is the problem. This is what it turned out I swallowed, or whatever, whatever happened, and what needs to be done, right? And there's no finality because the other person is not blocking your way. Instead, you're progressing. And because people understand that this is a story and this is your story as the patient, the kind of the prognosis become much better, right? A lot of the healing depends on the patient, and the patient's buy-in is much higher. And I just find this absolutely remarkable. And one question I can just pick up on something that Matt, you said, and this is a question to both of you. Do you guys think that fiction can help readers learn more about how to discern truth from fact? We hear a lot, especially like if you're like me and you're retweeting motivational tweets all the time, that one of the things like fiction, teaches people how real life is much better often than nonfiction. Does it help with the current chaos of deep fakes and misinformation and Russian bots? I've never thought about this before, Matt, so thank you so much. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this, and interpret fiction very, very broadly.
No, for sure. So, obviously there's a little bit of a leap when we talk about, deep fakes and Russian bots from fiction and, like that kind of stuff. But actually, absolutely, we can learn so much about the real world, the nonfiction that we live, by kind of seeking answers or seeking insights from books. And so let me just give you one example on perspective taking. And this, I call this Gertrudian perspective taking, comes from the Queen Gertrude from Hamlet. And so at the very end of the play, they're actually watching a play within a play. And there's someone called the player queen. And the player queen, her husband is murdered or dies or whatever. And then she basically keeps saying, oh my God, I'm never going to remarry. And repeats it over and over. I'm not going to remarry. Like, this is so terrible. And of course, Queen Gertrude, her husband died at the very start of the actual play, Hamlet. And she knew about the emotions that were going on in her own body. And so when she saw this other play that kind of mirrored her own situation, she said, the lady doth protest too much. And what she meant was, oh, if she says it that many times, then she's trying to hide what she truly feels. And so it's this kind of interesting thing where like maybe overly effusive language or like really trying too hard is actually suggesting that maybe the person doesn't have whatever, like they're really, whatever the explicit language that they're saying is. And so here's like one example of like, how do you find the truth out? Well, you find the truth by kind of like connecting with your own emotions, seeing like how the situation kind of, conflicts or totally parallels it. And then you say, oh, like, this doesn't make sense, or this does make sense. So that's just like one example of how do you kind of tell truth from a lie. And there's like a lot of ways to do it. And it's not like going to be perfect every time, because maybe, the player queen's just different. But, these kind of circumstances give you this like kind of contextual in a fictional narrative kind of space where you're like, there's nothing else other than what's written in that particular book. And so, it can be interpreted many different ways, but then it can be used as a paradigm or just some kind of pattern to then think about later on. So maybe that's one example of, where we can learn deep truths in fiction. Actually, I actually wrote a blog post on this called Perspective Taking. I have like a blog or like whatever Substack, but I really treat it as a blog.
In the description of the video. Send me the link.
Okay, I'll send you the link.
Do you want to give a bit of a summary now of the piece?
Oh, sure. So I basically talk about how perspective taking is not just in fiction, but it's also in nonfiction. And so it's very like, I love that you asked this question, because it was just a thought that I had a lot. And it was kind of inspired by some of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work. And so, there's a pandemic over the last year, and it's still going on. And one of the things that they did back in the 80s, or maybe it was the 70s, was ask this question that was actually very pandemic related. Say there was this avian flu that was coming in, and they basically wanted to figure out a way to, like, if you were the person making policy decisions, they presented you two different kind of scenarios. And one scenario was essentially, when you do the math, it's there's 600 people. So it's either save 400 people or let 200 people die, kind of thing. And so, but then there's like this, for sure 200 people die, or there's a chance of 200 people dying, or for sure save 400 people, or there's a chance of, like, but basically the idea is that the way you frame things matters. And so, you know, this was kind of this really fascinating research that framing matters, and then framing matters in so many business contexts, and it's just a useful thing to think about. But then the question is, like, does it actually matter? Like, is this like a real life scenario? And like, what other things do we want to think about? Like, are people just like bad at math? Like, what, like, as opposed to just framing matters, and this is like a good way, like, this is the proof that it does. And maybe it does for like buying like kind of trivial things, but for the big decisions in life, like if this was going to be a lifelong thing or life and death for yourself, you're probably going to do the math, think about it both ways, and say, okay, whatever, like it actually doesn't matter either way, or, you know, whatever it is. And especially if you had both things lined up next to each other. And so I kind of look at that of like, well, if you had both their paradigms, you're like, okay, it doesn't matter. But since you have one or the other, you're like, well, given that it's arbitrary, I might as well kind of take a positive outlook on things, or I might as well like, but like basically it's kind of the, I kind of think there's some problems in that comparison. And so I think about that kind of thing and just pose some of the maybe unanswered questions around their thought experiment and their and the way they collected their data. And then combine that with both the Gertrudian perspective taking that I was just talking about, and then another reading of the Oedipus tale. And so Oedipus Rex is the story that everyone knows about a man killing his father and then sleeping with his mother. And, you know, that's obviously the most disgusting thing you could ever imagine, right? But maybe that's not the story. And once again, I wrote this at the very start of the pandemic, and I was kind of like pandemic inspired, because actually in the Oedipus Rex story, there's a pandemic. And there's all these bad things that happen. And basically in the story, it's like, well, because he had sex with his mom, killed his dad, of course he's going to bring a pandemic to Thebes. Of course, all this other bad stuff's going to happen, because like, that is just totally inappropriate behavior. But now let's just take the perspective of science. We know that if you commit incest, that doesn't bring on a plague to your entire civilization or your entire city. That those things aren't connected. So if we just take it from that perspective, we're like, well, wait a second. What if there were storytellers? And what if the storytellers are the winners in the story? Okay, well, and assuming, because all stories are written by the winners, or the people who have kind of the means to write those stories, and basically the people who die can't write the stories, the people who are banned and banished can't write the stories. So it's like, if we're writing from the winner's perspective, then maybe what's really going on is they're trying to justify the banishing. And maybe actually there is something else going on. And so that something else that's going on could be, this gets into actually one of these Rene Girard things. And so turns out that Oedipus is the outsider. He comes into the city, becomes the king or whatever. And then something bad happens, a plague. And so when the plague hits, to basically create calm again, what you have to do is say, let's scapegoat this guy. And he was the outsider who's now the king. And so you scapegoat him. And so maybe one of the best ways to scapegoat him is to say he did these really atrocious things that are like absolutely terrible, blame all the bad stuff on it. And then that means that essentially the rest of the city is purified and exonerated afterwards. So a long way of basically saying, by looking at stories, thinking about who's telling the stories, thinking about like the true science behind it, and just applying that kind of thing. And of course, that's one interpretation. It's not necessarily the correct interpretation. And maybe there's no correct or many correct, but it's just ways to think about the world. And if you take that, like kind of think about the world from many ways and apply it to a non-fictional space of like, is this the truth that I'm hearing? And it could just be like a fact. Maybe you tell me something like, oh, the sun actually no longer comes up. It's a power company that's throwing up the sun ever. Well, then I'd be like, okay, well, what about the laws of physics? How does that work? And basically just like, it's a conciliant kind of perspectives,
right?
Like yeah, like if you can get the answer from it, yeah.
Anwar, I would love to throw the mic at you, but I just want to add one thing, because I have this scandalous theory about Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs book, right? So it's nonfiction, it's a biography. It was, I think, mostly written while Jobs was still alive, right? And his very powerful family and extremely powerful company, everybody basically watching Walter Isaacson's hand, right, as he's writing this. And he wants to do a good job. And at the beginning of the book, there is a scene of how Steve Jobs met his second wife, Lorraine, right? And now, if you know anything about Steve Jobs, you know that Lorraine is pretty hands-on when it comes to her late husband's legacy. So, you know, this story had to be written in a way that tells you the truth without being objected to, you know, by Lorraine. And it's masterful. It's 2.5 pages. And I was literally like screaming with joy at the book. Like, it's so well written. Basically what happens is that Lorraine Jobs very aggressively hits on Steve Jobs, right? Like it's beautiful. But he, you know, Walter Isaacson cannot say this, right? He cannot say that, oh, there's this woman and she went to this lecture and basically like threw herself at Steve Jobs. Instead, you know, it's kind of a patchwork, right? And then as you read, because of the repetitions and the allusions and the denial, you put it together that, oh, right, because the lady doth protest too much, right? It's like, I didn't know he was going to talk. I only went with a friend. I didn't know who he was. Right? I just followed him to the parking lot. I was just standing there. I just came back. I didn't know. They're like, really? And I remember I was like so delighted by this part because it was beautiful. It's like, this is how, you know, under authoritarian regimes, people talk to journalists. Like, how do you tell the truth? And first of all, I had a really interesting Twitter exchange with Julia Galef about this, because I was like, Julia, you have to read this. This is amazing. And she was like, I don't see it. And I was like, yeah, because she never did it. But that's my opinion. But it comes from fiction, right? It's musical. The theme comes back in the texts or poetry, right? Like that kind of subtextual truth, we know it from fiction. And so you bring that knowledge of like Schiller and, you know, Elfriede Jelinek and all these very, very subtextual writers, you bring in this knowledge like, oh, like this has been repeated 3 times in 1.5 pages because it's not true. That's why she says it so many times, and it's perfect. So it's just, you know, it's a Pandora's box of beauty when you know where to look. Sorry, we shut up, and Anwar, the stage is yours. Take it.
Please don't shut up. This is very interesting. An interesting tangent from this is that don't just that, like, you get exposed to situations that you will never be exposed to, perhaps in real life, but at the same time, we all have opinions on certain things that never happened to us. But yeah, I have an opinion on that, even though it never happened to me. And it makes it so much easier when it's in disguise of something else. Like we were talking about this in yesterday's Nobel Salon, when stories about the last unicorn. And in one of the lines, it said, a beautiful unicorn. And if the unicorn was a human being, we'd be like, well, what does she look like if the unicorn, because she was a female unicorn, and if it was a unicorn and we said it's beautiful, we want to, not necessarily judge, but we have so many framings and we want to know more about it. And I think that the morals of the novel was much better conveyed when it's in disguise of a unicorn rather than a human being. And another interesting tangent, I'm going to be talking about so many tangents here, is the metaphorical language, and how I've read once that poetry is, reading poems is excellent for being good at interpretations. And it's the same thing with music. When you hear music, it's never, unless it's an opera, you hear lyrics if you understand the language, but at the same time, if it's instrumental, you have to add to the context, to add context to the piece. And you start connecting different things, and you ask questions like, when was the composer writing this? Where was he at? I say he because most of the time we're male composer, but he or she at when they were writing this piece. And one of the very interesting things that happened during one of my piano classes, I was playing Mozart's Fantasia in D minor, and there was this chromatic scale, and it was going from the note A to D, as I remember. And perhaps I could put the music sheets just to cheat a little bit. And my music teacher asked me, like, what does this chromatic scale mean? And I was like, yeah, it's a transition from A to D. That's why we have to do a chromatic scale. And then he was like, you're giving me like a dry definition of like a music context, but how would that be for Mozart? What did he mean when he puts this chromatic scale from A to D? And assuming it's from A to D. And I was like, I don't know, like, enlighten me. And he said, well, chromatic scale is a disguise of someone crying. It represents someone crying because we cry in chromatic scale, whether it's ascending or descending. So perhaps Mozart is crying at this phrase. And I asked myself, how much am I missing out and not being able to appreciate certain passages or interpret them in the best way possible when I hear a piece. So you become, because we're living in a metaphorical world, and it's not just in music that we see metaphors, but also in poems and even physicists when they write, like such as Carlo Rovelli, when he writes amazing books on physics, and he makes pianists like me. Even though I'm genuinely interested in physics before Carlo Rovelli, but I'm sure he made other people who are non-physicists read physics and be interested in them. And I believe, from my personal takes from his book, it's because of his excellent usage of metaphors. It's sort of like there's the pianist and there's like the physicist, and their language is going to be a bit different. Am I lagging? Okay, I think I'm cool. So this is the physicist and this is the pianist, and metaphors is the sort of thing that brings them together, that makes them understand their language better. But and I feel like there are two sides of this. The side how to be good in using metaphors. How can I communicate with others who are outside of my field, whether it's engineering or music, and create a common language between me and them? And then there's also the other side, which is how can I, as someone who is receiving the metaphors, interpret them in an excellent way? Because yeah, like metaphors are meant to be interpreted, and that's the beauty of it. But then there's also like, yeah, your interpretation can be a little bit like not a very good one, and you're missing out so much. Just like when I was saying, yeah, it's just a transition to the A and D, that's it. When it turns out that Mozart was probably crying in that phrase. So yeah, these are the tangents that I'm very interested in exploring, whether it's being on the side of giving the metaphors and creating the metaphors for others, and receiving those metaphors.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
Anwar, but I think it's going to be fine. Sorry, Matt, go.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's something really interesting about thinking about that metaphor of Mozart crying and thinking about all the other dimensions to music, because it's not just like there's a scale, but then there's the rhythm, there's the tempo, you know, it's how loud you're playing, there's all these other aspects. And so I feel like, I mean, I don't know, because I play guitar, but I'm a beginner, I would say. And I'd be curious from your perspective of when you learned that it was Mozart crying, what other aspects, like, did you change anything? Like, how did it, like, how do you think about playing the music after that?
Yes, there's definitely, the emotional became very emotional. It's meant to be emotional. I was playing it as like, you can tell that I wanted to go from that A to D, like let's just get it done and go to that D. But it became just so much more gentle and just more friendly to the ears. And then speaking of rhythms, maybe this is also another tangent. Don't you notice that whatever you do, you start looking at it from its lens? So for example, if I'm a musician, I start to look at things, whether non-music related, from this lens. And I was having a conversation with a friend about, since you mentioned rhythms, I was like, the rhythm of this book is so slow and like I cannot get it done and so on. I kept using the word rhythm. And it turns out that actually writers do control your rhythm when you are reading, whether like if they're using descriptive sentences, that's their way of controlling your rhythm and slowing it down. And if they're putting like conversations that are our dialogues, that's their way of making you wanting to read the pages faster and faster. And I did not know that initially, but I already had that in mind. I didn't know it was a thing, but because I play music, I was looking at the book from the lens of music, and I was describing it with its rhythms. And then it turns out to be a real thing, actually. And it's very interesting how artists view science or vice versa from the lens of what they're doing. And at the end of the day, just as you mentioned earlier, Matt, that you see this beautiful intersection at the end of the day, and you see that both of them share this common ground between them. Yeah, this is a beautiful sweet spot to stand on.
So just on that common ground, one of the things I talked about this in the Borges Salon, and I think people enjoyed reading this, is there's a article by Neri Oxman, who's a Media Lab professor, called "The Age of Entanglement." And it builds off of another book by this guy, Rich Gold, who I think he wrote something called The Four Hats of Creativity. And what he describes there are engineering, science, art, and design. And I think the way Neri thinks about it is there's science as exploration, engineering as invention, design as communication, and art as expression. And the way she's kind of designed this article and then visualized it is it's a cycle that all plays upon itself. And so you know, you explore and then you invent and then you have to communicate to other people and then you're able to express new kind of things. And then there's this cool jump from like expression to new exploration, and so that's like this art to science kind of jump, and that's one framework to think about, and I think it's a useful one. And what's really interesting to me is how do art projects inspire science explorations? And so I heard some stat, and I don't know if it's true or not, but it's one of those like kind of fun anecdotes that Nobel Prize winners tend to have an artistic, or like more often than other scientists have an artistic passion. So maybe they do drama, or maybe they, you know, play a musical instrument or something like that.
Einstein's violin, right? Einstein playing the violin.
Yes, yes.
Like 7 years as he was thinking. There you go.
And it makes sense, you know, because it's like a deep refinement and you're just always going deeper, but also you're getting in a flow state. And so it's like, how do those two things play on each other? And Anwar is talking about, you know, the lens that she brings from playing the piano, or the lens that just doing any kind of activity brings. And so I always find that to be a kind of fascinating thing. And so that's how actually some of our research projects get spun up. We're just like, let's do something that's goofy, that feels fun. Let's even make it an art project. And we've had it at like Ars Electronica has been one of our like venues for a little art piece. But then we turn that into something else. And so we turn that into maybe experiments where people are trying to detect where synthetic manipulations are in images and stuff. And so we've kind of figured out different ways to thread the creation of the project as this artistic endeavor, and then kind of the follow through of the project as a kind of scientific output. And it's just like kind of a fun way that at the Media Lab we've been producing some work.
I was just going to say that you have these fantastic institutions, right? Like the Media Lab, or in LA, you have the Science and Entertainment Exchange, right? Where they very kind of deliberately bring together Hollywood people and content people with scientists. And it led to the, the renaissance of the Cosmos series and all of other things, just by putting a physicist and a producer down for a dinner, and because usually they are quite interested in each other's jobs, and there can be a very lucrative conversation there. And I was thinking, as you were, as we kind of arrive at the conclusion that everything is a metaphor and we can't really interpret anything without it, right? It's so difficult to think it just in pure images. And the people who do, some of the greatest scientists and visual artists, tend to be musically very gifted, interestingly, right? Because music kind of unfolds for the people who are very knowledgeable about it in shapes, right? People talk about seeing music almost as a kind of synesthesia. But I'm thinking also like how, salons are metaphors, right? And they have this kind of Droste effect, like Midnight in Paris, everybody wants to be an earlier age, right? If we do a salon in a Zoom call, we fantasize about being together physically and me giving you, I don't know, wine and cheese and fruits and exchanging books, hand to hand. If we were actually doing that, and in some cities in the world, people are already doing that, physical, offline, interintact salons, they are also fantasizing back to the 60s or Gertrude Stein's salon, right? And Gertrude Stein is fantasizing about Toulouse-Lautrec, and Toulouse-Lautrec is thinking about Caravaggio, and it kind of goes back to a cave, right? Or the Athens Academy. But it's interesting to me how we create this metaphorical genre, which is an II salon, interintact salon, and it's a free space for exploring, thinking and art together. And I would love to hear a little bit about how, engineering and music, multidisciplinary storytelling and media art, how do you bring that into your salons? And do you think that there is any kind of limitation to how much the salon as a format can absorb, or how far it can go? Either you're at your own salons or just like as a participant, what would be the maximum where you would be like, no, this is actually like dismantling the format now?
I think the most beautiful thing about interintellect salons is that everyone brings this element of personal experience. You don't really have to be well educated. I mean, yesterday I hosted a salon on reading novels, and I'm the most humble, I have the most humble experience, and everyone has big bookshelves, and you can see how selfish I am. Yeah, let's just take notes and see with novels to read and so on. So it has this beautiful element of bringing into the salons personal experiences. And when we talk about personal experiences, you don't really get worried whether is it truth or false, or true or false, or as you mentioned, Matt, earlier about true and false. And that's I think an important element is to, you don't really think, should I be really thinking this idea? Am I good enough to think about this idea? Am I good enough to, there's no element of being good enough. You can be as selfish as you want with the topics, and just
everybody's really good at just being themselves, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when it comes to, that's why I think most of them, again, we're going back to storytelling, like they're just telling their own story, combining both the personal experience and their academic work. So I think this is an important and a very beautiful element.
So, building off of that there's this one aspect to interintellect salons that I think is, there's many aspects that are unique to interintellect salons, but the thing that I love the most is the introductory question. And also thinking about what the introductory question will be, and then kind of playing around with learning about people really quickly by a question that kind of is intellectual yet vulnerable and personal. And so like different examples of these are when I did one on emotions as a compass, we started with what's your experience with awe? Oh, you know, when was the last time you felt awe? Or and so it gets very personal, but then you also have to describe how that's connected. You don't have to, but like it's often people want to. Or another like way that we might introduce it is in the Borges Salon, I asked about artworks, books, or other kind of pieces of media where people came back for a second or third or 100th time, and what their perspective was like reading something twice or experiencing something for, you know, an nth time. And many people have these experiences where it was a very different experience to read it the second time and third time. And many authors have described this kind of thing. And actually, Anna sent me a great link to Italo Calvino's, you know, what makes a great classic piece of art. And it turns out that like number 4 in his list of 14 happens to be that you reread it over and over and over again. And so there's just these like fun things you take like, but everybody's answer to that is going to be different, or at least my experience in the salon, it was different. And I would imagine you ask people that on 2 different days, that answer's slightly different. And especially if you ask them that over and over again, it starts very much changing. And so I love like the different dynamics that kind of come up. And I guess this is all centered in what at least the internet intellect kind of like dialogue and community is centered in gift exchange. And what I mean by that is people are vulnerable and sharing something about themselves and their ideas about the world. And I think there's something really special there. And the reason I bring up gift exchange is because another salon, and I don't know what brings all my salons together. I'm still figuring out what the like golden thread is, what the common thing is. But another salon was on art. And gift exchange. And there's this amazing book by this author, Lewis Hyde. And basically he wants to explore art. And his thinking is, well, if you want to explore art, you have to explore gift exchange. And the reason for that is because you can't have art without gift exchange. And he has like a very long kind of like book with lots of examples and arguments to support this kind of thing. But the general idea is that gift exchange is one, like your talents, the gifts that you're kind of like, you bring to this world. Speaking about Mozart and the fact that he was a virtuoso at like 4 years old, that's a gift. That's, you know, but also like the gift of viewing some kind of art or listening to some kind of art and how it's changing you. And it's only that way if it is a gift and if you're willing to receive that gift. But if you're not willing to receive, you're not going to get the great insights. And so I feel like there's something really special about, not only is it a kind of avenue or venue for gift exchange, but people are often very willing to accept the gifts because you're really putting yourself out there to take 3 hours out of your day to do this kind of thing, to be online when like, you know, it's often more fun to be like running outside or whatever else, and to like deal with people when you can just like, you know, randomly say stuff on Twitter or whatever. Like, it's great that people are doing this. And so that was just like another thing I wanted to highlight in kind of how art is intertwined with inner intellect.
I love this so much. And I love the idea of the gift exchange, like interact as gift, as a space for gift exchange. I love it. And where would you like to do like maybe the closing remarks on how your salon yesterday, because before we started recording, we actually were talking about this, that your entire salon yesterday was basically about gift exchange. And then maybe, you know, as kind of the outro, we can also talk a little bit about your next salons, just to wrap up. I love this so much and I can't wait. Now I'm like, I want to go to a salon and exchange gifts.
Yeah, same here, Anna. Just one thing that Matt mentioned about the prompt question. One of the things that also relates maybe to my salon yesterday is that when we ask a prompt question, and you expect just maybe a short answer and then you move on to the next attendee. However, sometimes the prompt question can last for 3 hours, because when someone like answers the prompt question, everyone is willing to give feedback. Like for example, yeah, I introduce myself. I'm a musician. I'm struggling with this, and I start like it's a safe space to be vulnerable. So I put like everything, like everything in my life in my prompt question, and everyone is willing. Like, hey, I work at this, or like you start getting insights, and this is what I love about the prompt question part. It's not just to break the ice and then move on to the topic, but somehow the top we already talk about the topic with the prompt question, and everyone has gets feedbacks from others. And I'm gonna combine my salon yesterday and the one that I did probably a month ago, I think, yeah, about storytelling. And the prompt question for storytelling was to describe the current theme that's going on in their lives. And what I truly fell in love with was that everyone's starting talking about their theme and their life, and you see so many people. Maybe I would be talking about my theme, and I think it's an unusual one. However, someone comes up and say, yeah, you're not alone, you have this and that, and this element is such a beautiful element. You just don't feel like you're alone. And just like how we started this episode when we were like, yeah, introduce yourself. Like you run into so many generalists, and this is something that, at least for like me here in Kuwait, I don't encounter so many generalists. Everyone is specialized, like say 90% in something, and that's the beauty of it. And my salon yesterday was a beautiful combination of it was called Let's Read Novels, and everyone brought up their +1, which is a book, and it turned +1, 2, 3, and everyone was reading their novels beautifully. Everyone had around 5 minutes to talk about their novels, and then 5 minutes to read about the novel, because we often spend so much time talking about novels, but we don't actually read the novels. It's kind of, I was describing it yesterday, when you have the book, it's like the main dish, but yesterday was kind of like having a snack of each book to test it out. And then if you like it, you can have it as a main dish and order it through Amazon. And so, yeah, I had so many snacks of books yesterday. So they were also delicious. And the snacks were about unicorns, throwing dice in life, living in a world without memory. So many different themes, yet everyone could contribute to the themes and discuss them. Yeah, it was such a beautiful night, or morning for others.
Love it so much, and I have massive FOMO now for or ROMO, regrets of having missed out, whatever the acronym for that is. I mean, when I did the book therapy recommendation party, I ordered like 12 books after. It's really dangerous. And I was just pretending it's for work, you know, so I don't feel super guilty. Thank you so much. I'm kind of just as a kind of outro, next salon ideas. What are you guys working on? What should the audience expect to be listed in the near future? And is there any other exciting thing going on in the next month of your summer that you want to share anything about? Matt, do you wanna jump in?
Yeah. So I am in the process of coming up with my next like set of salons. So it's not yet to be revealed, but it's all around this idea of decision making, emotions, artificial intelligence. How do these kind of things all combine? Where do emotions kind of lead us to better decisions, more creativity, just like kind of wider perspectives and new discoveries? And when do they kind of like limit us or kind of lead us to bias? And then just how do we build kind of computer algorithmic systems to kind of better identify things, or where do those things not work out? And so that's kind of the space that I'm looking at. And then I'm trying to figure out where's the most interesting conversation to be had around those. So that's what's kind of coming up next.
I hope I can make it to that one, Matt. For me, currently, I had an idea. I actually have it in my salon notes yesterday. While I was at the salon, I was like, oh my God, I have an idea for the next salon. And
That's me all the time. It's like, it's a little like tapestry, right? It's like one salon leads to the next, etc.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's this beautiful synergy that's happening at the salon, and you have a bunch of ideas that are sparking. And I'm very interested in our perception of time currently, and I'm low-key inviting physicists to this one because I really want to see the perspective of scientists, because but there's also this very emotional aspect of our perception of time, and of course inspired by Carlo Rovelli and Alan Lightman, all of these physicists who have wonderful books and about physics, concepts in physics, yet they make non-physicists people read physics. I'm excited.
I loved it. And we have a lot of physicists in the community as well. You can, it's a funny story that the very first, like, Matt, you were talking about the permutations, like the very first version of the II in October 2016, before it kind of went through its own journey of becoming what it is today, the first name of the company was Light Clock, after the Einstein thought experiment of the light beam between two mirrors, and visualizing basically space-time, and I just love that image so much, and the reciprocity, and it's so funny because if you want to create a very basic logo of, when we were working on like Light Clock as a logo, and you have like two little lines, with a dot between, almost like a door, right? And then the II is two eyes, right? So it's almost the same. And I thought, we only have one idea in our lives. That was mine. So definitely here for it, to discuss time with all its mystery. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me today. We did the time zone horror coordination, Europe, America, Middle East, and we did it. Congratulations, I love it. And I can't wait to, read your new salon announcements and attend if I can, because these ideas are constantly the main sources of fascination for me. Thank you so much, and talk to you very soon. And thank you everybody who watched. Take care.